This is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast with historian Stephen Ujifusa. Business, history, and culture with a nautical twist. On this episode, A Cursed Mansion in Belmont, the rise and fall of the Rorke family. For about 10 years, I lived in West Philadelphia, a part of the city that was right out of Booth Tarkington's novel, The Magnificent Ambersons of 1918. In this novel, Booth Tarkington described the rise and fall of an Indianapolis Gilded Age real estate family that developed a neighborhood that started off as a green suburb, but ended up being engulfed by industry. Their cluster of mansions stood at the center of this whole empire. The third-generation scion of the Amberson family, George Minafer, leaves Indianapolis for an Eastern college, most likely Tarkington's alma mater of Princeton, and then when he comes home refuses to get an actual job. He is an entitled brat with an Oedipus complex. He courts the daughter of a former boyfriend of his mother's, who had started off with nothing but had risen to become a wealthy automobile manufacturer. However, she turns him down because he refuses to put his Ivy League degree and social connections to practical use. He'd rather be, he declares, a yachtsman, strange for someone who lives in the Midwest. Upon his grandfather's death, it is discovered that the old patriarch had died virtually bankrupt, a victim of changing real estate values, the automobile, and suburbanization. Their 1880s Romanesque revival compound is sold and torn down for row houses. When he picks up a local social register, he finds that the Amberson name has been dropped. Minafer eventually picks himself up and redeems himself, but not before being struck by a car while on the way to work at a chemical plant. This book was eventually made into a movie by Orson Welles in 1942. The story of the Rorkes is a Philadelphia version of the Magnificent Ambersons. In this case, however, the young heir has a much darker fate. The house, however, has survived. This is the story of the rise and the fall of the family of Alan B. Rorke. In the 1890s, the self-made construction magnate Alan B. Rorke appeared to be living the Gilded Age dream. Fame, fortune, social standing, and grand houses were all his. He belonged to the Union League, the Masonic Order of the Odd Fellows, the Legion of Honor, and the Clover Club. Among his construction clients were the Poth Brewing Company, the Philadelphia Traction Company, and Jacob Reed & Sons. He resided with his family in a townhouse at 131 South 18th Street, just off fashionable Rittenhouse Square. As a loyal member of Philadelphia's Republican Party machine, Rorke was considered by his friends to be an ideal candidate for mayor. Yet in the laissez-faire circus of late 19th century Philadelphia, the pressure to maintain appearances was crushing, and appearances could be deceiving. One observer noted that his contracts were always carried out with a disposition to do more rather than less than his specifications called for. The son of a master carpenter, Rorke, like so many tradesmen's children, left school at 14 to apprentice himself in his father's trade. At 21, he struck out on his own. One of his earliest construction projects was the horticultural hall of the 1876 Centennial Exposition, a colossal cast iron and glass pile designed by Hermann Schwarzmann. By his 30s, Rorke had a healthy portfolio of building projects in the Philadelphia area. His city directory listing advertised for estimates and plans furnished upon application for banks, warehouses, mills, churches, dwellings, and buildings of every description. Like many other prominent builders, he maintained an office in the Philadelphia Bourse Building near Independence Hall. Rorke's most high-profile project was the construction of the new Pennsylvania State Capitol in Harrisburg. Designed by architect Henry Ives Cobb, the structure was a replacement for the neoclassical structure that burned in a spectacular fire in 1897. Yet many in the Pennsylvania state government were unhappy with the Rorke-Cobb collaboration. One observer derided it as an unadorned, unfinished, several-story brown brick structure that looked like a factory. The legislature decided that rather than upgrade the structure, they would spend the money on a more grandiose home. The Pennsylvania state capitol debacle left him unfazed. As a way of solidifying his dynastic ambitions, Rorke purchased a big lot at the corner of 41st and Ogden Streets in West Philadelphia as the site of his son Franklin's new suburban home. It was an odd location for a socially ambitious businessman. The Belmont neighborhood at the time was comfortable but hardly fashionable, yet the Franklin Rorke mansion rivaled the big homes under construction a few miles to the west in Overbrook Farms. Unlike the nearby twins and row houses, Franklin's turreted Queen Anne mansion at 872 North 41st Street was a freestanding structure, surrounded by a garden and a stone fence. That summer, as the new family mansion rose on 41st Street, the Rorkes vacationed at the Seaside Hotel in Atlantic City. The nation had fully recovered from the panic of 1893, and the luxury hotels of the Jersey Shore were booked to capacity from June to September. The Philadelphia Times described the children as an exceedingly clever lot. That fall, a laudatory article appeared in the Philadelphia Times praising Rorke as the nation's greatest builder. On Christmas Eve, 1899, Alan Rorke spent the day with his son Franklin in West Philadelphia. The mansion at 41st and Ogden was nearing completion. The following day, at his townhouse on Rittenhouse Square, Rorke complained that he wasn't feeling well. He then collapsed to the floor, fell by a stroke. A second stroke rendered him unconscious. He died on December 26, his wife and sons Franklin and Alan Jr. at his side. His funeral took place at his Rittenhouse Square home. Governor William Stone and Mayor Samuel Ashbridge served as honorary pallbearers. Soon after the doors of the Rorke family's grand West Laurel Hill mausoleum were locked, his grieving wife and sons received another jolt. High society pundits speculated that Rorke had left a legacy north of $1 million, a princely sum in Gilded Age Philadelphia, and enough for the three heirs to continue on in high style. Instead, the nation's greatest builder had left his family a mere $952.56, or about $20,000 in today's money. Franklin and Alan Jr. were also left with their father's construction firm. The question was whether or not they could salvage it and their family's fortunes. During the hot summer of July 1900, Franklin Rorke was faced with mounting bills and a failing construction business. His new mansion at 41st and Ogden, an extravagant gift from his late father, had every modern convenience and boasted mosaics, hardwood floors, marble trim, and onyx fireplaces, as well as a fully equipped stable in the rear. Yet Rorke couldn't afford to maintain or staff it. The $300 he had received from his late father's estate had almost certainly run out. Rorke's wife Helen was terrified of the man once heralded as the scion of an exceedingly clever clan. He had hallucinations of hearing and sight, she alleged, and thought persons were secreted about the house and that detectives were following him in an effort to kill him. Rorke then started making threats on his wife's life and drove her from the house in one of his rages. Then Rorke turned his fury on his own mother, attacking her with a razor blade. The Rorke mansion, built as a glittering testament to the family's wealth, had become a 7,000-square-foot house of horrors. Helen Rorke finally had her husband committed to a new West Philadelphia home, the Institute of the Pennsylvania Hospital at 49th and Market Street. A year later, the Republican politician and former Philadelphia District Attorney George S. Graham successfully petitioned the Quarter Sessions Court to release Franklin Rorke from the insane asylum. Judge Stevenson signed off on the release. According to the Philadelphia Times, Rorke had only been in the institution temporarily and was in his proper mind, and it would be manifestly wrong to keep him there any longer. What Rorke's mother and wife thought of Franklin's release is unclear, but it may have been one last political favor by Graham for his late friend and fellow Union League member Allen B. Rorke. In 1906, Barber, Hartman and Company listed the former Franklin Rorke mansion for sale. This property was built and owned by the famous Philadelphia contractor, the advertisement stated, and no expense was spared to erect one of the handsomest properties in West Philadelphia. The premises are in a first-class condition and will be sold at a great sacrifice. That same year, Franklin Rorke was thrown in jail for creating a scene with a pistol in a West Philadelphia saloon. He and his long-suffering wife Helen, who stated that he had been drinking excessively and abusing her, were now residing in a modest dwelling at 4043 Bering Street. An unnamed family friend bailed out the miscreant former construction heir for $1,000, or about $20,000 today. This was approximately the same amount Alan Rorke had left his children 7 years earlier. Franklin Rorke died in 1915, working as a bailiff for the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas, a position that was almost certainly another favor from one of his father's friends. His brother, Alan B. Rorke, led a much quieter life, carrying on what was left of the family business and last appearing in the Philadelphia City Directory in 1926. The Franklin Rorke mansion still stands at the corner of 41st and Ogden Streets. It fell into disrepair and abandonment, and for years stood as a boarded-up, vandalized shell. It is a sad home of might-have-beens. The cast-iron oriel window at the center of its main facade was removed, as were the elaborate railings. Yet the mansion's stone walls and turrets remained sturdy, and the roof did not cave in, a testament to the care and attention Alan B. Rorke, once lauded as the nation's greatest builder, put into this gift for his son 120 years ago. Recently, the Rorke mansion was purchased, restored, and renovated into apartments. The Rorke mansion has given up its secret of failed dynastic ambitions, addiction, and mental illness. What does remain constant in families, whether in the 1890s or today, is what Congressman Jack Amberson tells his crestfallen nephew George Minafer in The Magnificent Ambersons. Life and money both behave like loose quicksilver in a nest of cracks. When they're gone, you can't tell where or what the devil you did with them. This is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast with historian Stephen Ujifusa. Thank you for listening. You can expect new episodes every week. To subscribe to the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast, visit steveujifusa.substack.com.